Let us very quickly recap
Sir,
what we have discussed so far.
sir,
Research is
yes,
the
sir. I
journey
have, yeah,
from unknown to known. It's to add some knowledge. There are different approaches to research. The most popular approaches are quantitative approach and qualitative approach. Quantitative approach relies on objectivity, testing everything based on statistical evidences. So quantitative research tools are most important. What are the important parameters and assumptions of quantitative school? Your sampling frame should be large. You should have very high clarity about the type of data that you have. You should be able to create high level of generalizability based on your research. There should be very high level of validity and reliability. So these are the basic pillars of quantitative research that we have identified. How do you start the research? First step is problem identification. What do you do thereafter? You undertake literature review, find out gap in the research. What is the research gap? Once you have identified research gap very clearly, then the next step thereafter is preparing your research plan, identifying your research objectives, very narrow, very focused, very clear, preparing your hypothesis, null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis. You're going to test the null hypothesis. You're not going to prove null hypothesis, you are going to test the null hypothesis. Then for that, you have to prepare a research design. How are you going to conduct the research experience, the research process? There are different type of research methodologies. Here, you may go for experimental research, you may go for descriptive research, you may go for analytical research, you may go for exploratory research, you may go for various other forms of research. Exploratory research is generally more prevalent in case of qualitative research. Experimental researches are more used in agriculture, in sciences, in technological sectors, and in humanities also, in psychology and in some other branches. And they obviously they give very high level of accuracy in terms of findings. And then you prepare your standards, you set your standards, you set your benchmarks, you decide about the limits of confidence, and then you undertake data collection, prepare your sampling framework, undertake pilot testing. After the data collection, analyze the data using certain statistical softwares, and at the end, you prepare your model, which you again check out for its validity, reliability, generalizability, and present it to the world. This is going to be your contribution to the research world. And if there are some limitations, then you mention them as your limitations so that others can keep them in mind. If you want that there should be more detailed study on a particular field, you mention it separately in your research report that there is a need of a thorough study in this field so that other research scholars are able to focus on that aspect. So these are the essential steps that we have taken up. Statistical tools may vary from research to research, from field to field. Some tools may be more popular in management disciplines, some tools may be more popular in engineering, technology, science streams. So that's why MATLAB is more popular among engineering streams, technological streams, while a software like SPSS is more used among the social sciences, while eViews is more used in econometrics research, econometrics analysis. So different type of softwares can be used. These softwares have been started recently. Earlier, people used to use statistics through calculators, even before that without calculators even. So the prime intention is to undertake some data analysis and present it. You can use MS Excel, which is also very popular and very friendly software. You can use R. Today, there is a trend among the researchers to use R for statistical data analysis. So it depends upon your research purpose. What is your research objective? How you want to undertake data analysis? It depends upon that. For example, if you are undertaking a research on consumer perception, you want to know what is the consumer perception regarding a particular brand, then what kind of expectations you carry, what kind of research model you want to test, what kind of research model you want to prepare. You have to prepare a clear blueprint in your mind. After the consumer study, you may use factor analysis for identifying factors related to consumer perception. So a tool like factor analysis may be useful for you in your data analysis process. So there are plenty of tools and there is no limit. There is no limit that only these tools are to be used. You can develop new tools. You can invent new research methodologies. Who says that you have to use only the existing research tools? You can develop new methodologies which should be verifiable, which should be proper, which can be used. So you can combine two or three more methods that can also help you in your research. Nowadays, it is also very popular among the researchers to use 2-3 methods simultaneously and find out the findings and then compare those findings. So that can also be very useful. So research tools, statistical tools depend upon your research purpose. The most important thing is your research objective. What is your research objectives and how you wish to achieve those research objectives? It is common among quantitative researchers to undertake hypothesis testing. Some people are not very clear about hypothesis. I want to know from you, what do you think about hypothesis formulation? What is null hypothesis and what is alternate hypothesis? How will you frame null hypothesis?
Sir, this is Ramesh here. Good morning.
Welcome. Welcome.
Good morning. Ramesh here, sir. Sir, when you talk of null hypothesis, you first, before that, based on the objectives, you need to identify the variables. So the variables can be dependent variable and independent variable, right? So if there exists a difference between any of the variables, then it is not a null hypothesis. But if there is no difference that exists between two variables, then that's called as null hypothesis. So based on that, you come to the conclusion to carry on with the test, and then you need to go for data collection and do analysis. And once you get the result, and by the result what you get, then you can link that to the hypothesis, saying that whatever data you collected, whether it is matching with the hypothesis or not. So if there is a significant difference that arrives between the variables, then it's not called as null hypothesis. If there is a difference, if there is no difference exists between the variables, it's called as a null hypothesis. Unlikewise, it's called as a hypothesis. So that's what I want to say.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Outstanding answer. Very good answer,
Thank you,
Ramesh.
sir.
Very good. So Ramesh has very clearly mentioned that the first step in research process here is identifying variables. What is variable? The value of which varies from one unit to another. That is called variable. So, for example, if I want to find relation between demand and price, so these are two variables, because demand can also change, price can also change. Both are changeable and therefore variable. That is simple term. They are not static, they are variable. Now, Ramesh says identify one dependent, one independent variable. So which is dependent variable here? There are two things. One is price, one is demand. If our assumption is that the demand is dependent on price, So then demand is dependent variable, price is independent variable. So we change independent variable, keeping other things stable. All other things are stable, all other things are not changed. We change independent variable and see the impact on dependent variable. You increase the price, the demand should fall down as per your research framework, as per your hypothesis. You increase the price, demand should fall down. There is inverse relationship. You reduce the price, the demand should increase. So this is a relation that you have assumed to be there. So the first step is clarity of variables, independent variable and dependent variable. We have taken up two variables. There can be multiple variables. There may be some dependent variables. There may be some independent variables. To make it simple for our discussion, we have taken up only two variables, one independent variable, one dependent variable. Dependent variable is, in our case here, demand. An independent variable here, which we try to manipulate, we try to change in order to see the impact on dependent variable, is the price. So price moves, and as the price changes, demand also changes. The relation between price and demand has to be checked on statistical parameters. And then we will check null hypothesis. Null hypothesis says, as Ramesh ji has very clearly pointed out, null hypothesis says there is no relationship. An alternate hypothesis is the opposite of the null hypothesis. So we check null hypothesis. The idea is to check null hypothesis, and if the null hypothesis is rejected, then we can find that yes, the other possibility could be there. So there are possibilities of errors also, and during the research process, there are two common errors which we call as type 1 error and type 2 error. Yes, can any one of you tell me what is type 1 error and what is type 2 error? You might have studied this earlier. Who can tell me what is type 1 error and type 2 error? Type 1 error is when you reject a null hypothesis by mistake. So by mistake, I mean, you make a mistake when you reject a null hypothesis, which means there is some mistake on your part. There is some mistake in the process of research. That is called type 1 error. And type 2 error is the opposite of type 1 error. When you accept a null hypothesis which should have been rejected, so you make mistake. So these are the two type of mistakes which are possible. The probability of type 1 error will increase if you are too strict, you are trying to reject every hypothesis. In between, there is a possibility a true null hypothesis can be rejected. So when you are too rigid, the possibility of type 1 error will increase. And if you are too lenient, what will happen? Type 2 error, the possibility of type 2 error will increase. I hope the point is clear. Type 1 error, type 2 error. These are the two errors, and they are related to hypothesis testing. Hypothesis testing will enable you to find relation between variables which you have identified during the process of research. Okay, we have discussed in the previous class that during the process of your research, you try to prepare research instruments to collect data accurately. So research instruments could be your questionnaire. It could be your scale. There are various types of scales like Likert type scale, okay, sociometrics. So these are different type of measurement scales, Bogardas scale. So these different type of scales you can construct for data collection. And this scale will help you in collecting data. What are the principles of questionnaire construction or scale construction? If you try to develop a scale, how will you develop a scale? Or if you're trying to develop a questionnaire, how will you try to develop a questionnaire? Can any one of you tell me? What steps
Sir,
you will find?
yes, Ramesh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, when you are designing a questionnaire, first you need to understand what are your objectives, huh?
Yeah.
And after understanding what are your objectives, then you have to identify your variables in the objectives. And each question, whatever you draft in the questionnaire, is a variable, right? So when you're doing any test, so once you collect the data, so all the questions, whatever you collected from the questionnaire, is each one is one variable. And in that variables, whatever you collected, you have to identify which are dependent and independent variables. And based on that, you can go ahead and perform any statistical test. Those statistical tests can be t-test or ANOVA, or it can be factor analysis. So based on the question, you can identify that is an independent variable or a dependent variable. So you substitute these variables in the test and you get the conclusion. So based on that, the p-value, the significance value, whatever you have, you can say that your null hypothesis is rejected or your null hypothesis is accepted. So based on that, you'll come to a conclusion. So thank you.
Very good. Excellent. Very rightly pointed out by Mr. Ramesh. You identify variables for your study in your research based on your research objectives. And for each of these variables, you'll prepare questions. Ideally, you should prepare 2 questions for each variables. Why 2? Because during research, we have discussed that when you prepare a research instrument, you have to test the research instrument for its validity, for its reliability. Now, validity and reliability are again studied by various systematic and scientific methods. When we are talking about reliability, there are many methods to judge reliability, and one of them is split half reliability. So split half reliability is when one instrument, research instrument, is divided in 2 parts, equal parts, and from both the parts data are collected, and these data should give same finding. Then it is called the split half reliability. So you can use split half reliability, you can undertake split half reliability properly if you have 2 questions on each variable, but word it differently, put randomly, so that it is their results are independent. I mean, if the 2 questions are worded in the same manner, then their purpose is defeated. The questions should look different, but they are actually going to test one variable. They should be put in random order so that there is no possibility that the respondent can predict the next question and give answer. Questions should be in a flow, but at the same time, the question should come in a random manner. Some questions may be positively worded, some questions are worded in negatively, so that the respondent cannot just put a in every statement and do away the research work. No, the respondent should be, forced to apply mind and select the right answer out of ABCD choices that you have given. So preparing a good questionnaire requires good skills, which you will develop over a period of time. So research instruments have to be developed. You have to use appropriate tools to judge their reliability, validity, and once you find that they are up to mark statistically in terms of the reliability and validity, then you can apply them in your research process and collect data from them. From where will you collect data? Obviously, the sample. Which sample? In doctoral research, ideally you should use random sampling. You may use stratified random sampling, or you may use some other means. But ideally, the research at the level of doctoral level research, your sampling method should be random sampling, not convenience sampling. Of course, in some cases, you may have to use judgment sampling, because judgment sampling is used when you have a particular criteria on which you have to select respondent. Sometimes you may have to use quota sampling. Sometimes you may have to use cluster sampling. So you have to give justification what kind of sampling method you are using and why you are using it, right? I mean, the ultimate purpose is the sample that you select should represent the universe. The sample that you select should be able to represent the population for which you are trying to draw your research findings, your conclusions. Okay, now tomorrow and day after tomorrow, we will discuss how to prepare publishable articles, journal papers, and getting them published. What are the steps that we should keep in mind? What should we do? So all of you will share with me your perspective about how to write academic papers, how to get your work published, how to develop your power of expression. If there are any questions related to them, you are most welcome. Anyone who is willing to discuss these points is invited to join.